The wind howled across the empty road, carrying dust and the smell of metal. Daniel walked alone, his boots crunching over broken glass and rusted debris. The world around him was dead, the sky heavy with gray clouds. And the distant mountains looked like the bones of some ancient giant. He moved slowly, scanning the ruins for anything useful: a half-full can of water, a piece of clean cloth, or something he could trade later. His backpack was light, too light, and his stomach had been empty for more than a day. But hunger was nothing new to him. Loneliness was worse. It had been weeks since he had seen another living soul. The buildings on both sides of the road leaned like tired old men, their walls cracked, their windows broken. Once this place had been alive, with lights, noise, and people. But now it was only dust and silence. Daniel stopped for a moment, pulling his scarf tighter against the cold wind. That was when he heard it, a sound faint and strange, carried by the wind, not the sound of metal creaking or debris falling, but something softer, something alive. It was almost like a whisper or a whimper. Daniel froze, his eyes scanning the road ahead. No movement, only the same endless ruins. He took a few cautious steps forward. The sound came again, weak, broken, almost lost in the wind. His heart began to beat faster. For weeks he had been alone, and now someone else or something else. His hand moved to the handle of the small knife on his belt. He followed the sound, stepping off the main road and into the ruins. The air grew colder here, shadows stretching across the ground from broken walls and fallen beams. The noise was clearer now, like someone trying to breathe but failing behind a collapsed metal structure. He saw movement. Daniel stepped closer, his boots scraping against the rubble, and then he saw her. It was not a human. She was small, curled on the ground, her body partly trapped under a piece of metal beam. Her skin was pale with a faint glow, like moonlight shining through water. Her hair was silver, tangled and covered in dust. She was breathing shallowly, each breath sounding like it took all her strength. Daniel's first thought was to walk away. Helping her could mean trouble. He had learned that in this world. Helping the wrong person could get you killed. And she was not even human. She was one of them, the kind his people used to fight. The kind he had been told to avoid, but as he looked at her face, he saw fear, not anger. Her lips moved slightly. Daniel leaned closer. Her voice was barely a whisper, broken and trembling. "Help me." He froze. Those words. In English, her accent was strange, but he understood. She lifted her eyes to his. And for a second, he forgot where he was. Her eyes were unlike any he had seen before, deep, glowing faintly, with colors that shifted like a stormy sea. And in those eyes, he saw desperation. Daniel cursed under his breath. He knelt down, grabbing the metal beam, and with a grunt pushed it off her. She gasped, her body trembling. Daniel looked at her wounds, deep cuts leaking a strange blue liquid, burn marks across her arm, and bruises on her face. She was in bad shape, worse than he first thought. He looked around, the ruins silent again. For now, no one was watching. But if she was here, injured like this, someone must have done it to her, and they might still be nearby. He thought about leaving, telling himself it wasn't his problem. But his feet refused to move away. Instead, he pulled his scarf loose and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her skin was ice cold. She flinched at first, then relaxed, her breathing still weak. Daniel glanced at the sky. The light was fading. Night here was dangerous, not just because of the cold, but because of the things that hunted in the dark. If he left her here, she would not survive an hour. She looked up at him again, her lips parting as if to speak. But no words came out. Her eyes closed, and her body went limp. Daniel's chest tightened. She was slipping away. He didn't know why. But he reached down and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. The road ahead stretched into the shadows. He had no plan, no safe place nearby. But he could not leave her behind as he started walking. The wind carried another sound to him. This time, it wasn't her voice, it was a clicking noise. Sharp and rhythmic, Daniel knew that sound. Predators, they were already hunting, and now they had caught his scent. He tightened his grip on her and quickened his pace. Every instinct told him to drop her and run, but he kept going. The clicking grew louder, closer. The sun disappeared behind the ruins and darkness crept in. Daniel's breath turned to mist in the cold air. He didn't know who she was or why she was here, but one thing was certain: if he didn't keep moving, both of them would be dead before morning. Daniel kept moving through the ruins, his boots slipping on loose gravel as he carried the alien girl in his arms, her head resting weakly against his chest. Every breath she took was slow and shallow, and he could feel the faint tremble in her body. The cold wind cut through his jacket, but he didn't stop. He could still hear the clicking sounds behind him, sometimes closer, sometimes fading, but never gone. They were following, keeping their distance, waiting for the right moment. The city ruins stretched around him like a maze. Tall, broken walls casting long shadows, broken signs swaying in the wind, the air thick with dust. Daniel moved carefully, his eyes scanning every corner, his ears straining for movement. Now and then he glanced down at her, her silver hair shifting with each step, her glowing skin dimmer than before. The blue liquid from her wounds had slowed, but not stopped. She needed help soon. He turned into a narrow alley, stepping over twisted metal pipes and shattered glass. His breathing heavy from the weight in his arms, the girl made a faint sound, almost a groan. Her eyes fluttering open for a moment. She looked at him in confusion, as if trying to understand why a stranger was carrying her. Her lips moved, but the wind swallowed her words. He slowed down just enough to hear her whisper, "Don't leave me, please," her voice so weak it barely reached his ears. Daniel didn't answer. He just kept walking, though inside he felt a strange pull. He had told himself countless times never to get involved, never to help, because on this world kindness often got you killed. But here he was, risking everything for someone he didn't even know, someone who wasn't even human. The clicking behind him grew sharper, echoing off the walls. They were closer now, maybe less than 100 meters. He quickened his pace. The alley ended in a crumbled courtyard, broken stone benches and a shattered fountain at the center. Daniel scanned the area, spotting an old stairwell that led down into the shadows. It might be a basement, maybe even a way to hide. He hurried towards it, each step careful but fast. The clicking grew louder, mixed now with a low growl that sent chills down his spine. He reached the stairs and slipped inside, the air suddenly colder and heavier. The basement smelled of damp earth and rust. The only light came from small cracks in the wall where daylight fought to enter. Daniel set the girl down gently against the wall, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed. He knelt beside her, pulling off his gloves and checking her pulse. It was faint, but still there. She shivered, her body reacting to the cold. Daniel pulled a thin blanket from his pack and wrapped it around her. Her hand moved suddenly, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength for someone so weak. Her eyes met his, glowing faintly in the dim light. "They are coming?" she whispered, her voice urgent despite the weakness. Daniel already knew. He could hear them outside, claws scratching against stone. The faint hissing that meant they were tasting the air for his scent. He moved quietly, pulling out the small hunting knife from his belt. The girl shook her head slowly, her lips trembling as she tried to speak again. "No, you can't fight them." "Run," she said, her eyes filled with fear. Daniel stayed still, watching her for a moment, then shook his head. "Not without you," he said simply. His voice low, her eyes widened, as if she couldn't believe he would say such a thing. A shadow passed over the crack in the wall. The sound of heavy breathing just outside. Daniel tensed, gripping the knife tighter. The girl's grip on his wrist weakened, and she let go, her body slumping back against the wall, her strength spent. The scratching and clicking sounds grew louder. And now they were on the stairs, slow, deliberate steps. Like a predator that already knew its prey had no way out. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't fight them head-on, not with only a knife. His eyes darted to the far side of the basement where a broken air vent sat just above the floor, maybe big enough to crawl through. He moved quickly, kneeling beside the girl and lifting her again, her head resting limply on his shoulder, her breathing shallow and uneven. The first shadow fell across the basement floor as one of the creatures entered, its legs long and thin, its skin dark and slick, eyes reflecting the dim light like wet glass. It hissed, the sound sharp and cold. Daniel didn't look back. He sprinted to the vent, kicking away debris. The metal grill came loose with a screech. He shoved himself inside, dragging the girl with him. The metal scraping his shoulders. The creature let out a shrill cry, claws striking the ground as it lunged forward. Daniel crawled as fast as he could, the vent narrow and suffocating, dust filling his lungs. The girl stirred faintly in his arms, the echo of the creature's claws clanging against the vent behind. Them made him push faster, his heart pounding. Finally, the vent opened into another ruined building. This one quieter, the walls still mostly standing. Daniel climbed out, gasping for air. The girl in his arms still alive, but slipping further into unconsciousness. He pressed his back against the wall. Listening, the clicking was gone, for now. Maybe the creature had lost the trail. Maybe not. Daniel looked down at her pale face. The strange glow of her skin, faint, but still there. She was running out of time. He didn't know where he would find help on this dead world, but he knew he couldn't stop. The predators were still out there, and something told him they weren't the only danger following them. He tightened his grip on her and stepped back into the silent streets, ready to keep moving because stopping meant death for both of them. Daniel moved quickly through the broken streets, his breath misting in the cold air, the weight of the alien girl pressing against his arms. Her head leaned limply against his chest, her glowing skin now faint like a dying ember. Every step he took felt heavier, but stopping was not an option. The clicking of the predators had faded for now, but the city was never truly silent. Every distant creak or hollow echo could mean danger. The sun was sinking fast, casting the ruins in deep shadows. Daniel knew he had to find shelter before darkness fully claimed the streets. Night here was not just cold, it was alive with things that hunted in packs. Things that even he didn't dare face. He scanned the skeletal remains of buildings around him. Most were unstable or already collapsed. Then his eyes caught a tall, leaning tower in the distance. Half its top missing, but its lower floors still intact. He approached carefully. Weaving through overturned vehicles and piles of rubble, his boots crunching over scattered glass, the girl stirred weakly in his arms, a soft sound escaping her lips. He slowed just enough to hear her whisper something in her language. The words foreign, but her tone pleading. He murmured softly, "It's all right. You're safe," even though he wasn't sure if that was true. The tower's front entrance was blocked by fallen beams and shattered stone. Daniel shifted the girl's weight onto one arm and pushed through a narrow gap. The inside was dark. The smell of dust and mold thick in the air. His footsteps echoed faintly as he moved deeper. The walls cracked, the ceiling sagging in places, but it was shelter. He found a corner on the first floor that was still dry, setting the girl down gently on the ground. Her body trembling from the cold, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her along with a thin blanket from his pack. He could feel her heartbeat. Faint and irregular, her breathing shallow. She needed warmth, water, and food, things he didn't have enough of. He crouched beside her, pulling out his canteen and tilting it to her lips. She drank a small sip before coughing weakly, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Water. More." He hesitated, knowing he had little left, but gave her another mouthful anyway. Her glowing eyes met his for a brief moment before closing again. The tower creaked in the wind, loose bits of stone clattering to the floor. Daniel sat with his back to the wall, listening. The silence outside was too complete, which in his experience was never a good sign. His mind drifted to questions he didn't want to ask. Who was she? Why was she injured? And why were those predators hunting her? Sudden noise snapped him out of his thoughts. A faint metallic scrape from above. His muscles tensed. He reached for his knife. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. Someone or something was inside the building with them. He moved silently to the staircase. Peering upward into the darkness, the scraping stopped. Then a faint thud echoed from a higher floor. He returned to the girl, her breathing now slower, her skin cold against his hand. She wouldn't last long like this. Leaving her to check the noise felt risky. But staying put if something was stalking them could be worse. He decided to move her higher into the building, hoping to find a more secure spot. The stairs groaned under his weight as he climbed. The girl's limp form cradled in his arms. The air grew colder with each floor. On the third level, he found a room with a door still hanging on its hinges. He stepped inside, shutting it quietly behind them. The space was small, with a broken desk and scattered debris, but it was enclosed. Daniel laid her down carefully. Adjusting the blanket around her, he rubbed her hands gently, trying to get some warmth back into them. Her eyelids fluttered open for a moment, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Why? Help me." The question caught him off guard. He didn't have an answer that made sense. So he simply said, "Because you asked." Her gaze softened, but then a flicker of fear passed over her face. Her eyes darting toward the door. Daniel turned his head, hearing it 2 footsteps, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside the room. He rose silently, knife in hand, his heart pounding, the handle slick with sweat. The door creaked as if under pressure, but then the sound faded. The steps moving away, Daniel waited, every muscle tight, listening until the silence returned. When he looked back at her, she was already unconscious again. Night fell fully, the last of the light dying beyond the broken windows. Daniel knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, not here, not now. He would have to keep watch until morning. The shadows inside the room stretched, long wrapping around them like silent watchers. Somewhere far below, something howled, and the sound carried through the tower like a warning. Daniel sat beside her, keeping his knife ready. His eyes scanning the darkness. Every so often, he glanced at her face, wondering if she would survive until dawn. Outside, the wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it the faint clicking sound he had heard before. It was distant, but growing closer again. The night inside the leaning tower was colder than Daniel expected. The air sharp in his lungs, each breath visible in the dim moonlight that slipped through cracks in the walls. He sat close to the alien girl, his back against the wall, her skin still icy under the blanket, her breathing slow and uneven. He could feel her slipping further away with each passing hour. She needed more water, maybe food, maybe something to treat her wounds. The blue liquid seeping from her cuts had thickened, but it hadn't stopped. Daniel's supplies were too low. He could keep her warm, but warmth wouldn't save her for long. He knew if he stayed here until morning, she might not survive too. See the sunrise? The sound of clicking came again, faint but steady, somewhere outside the tower. The predators hadn't left. They were patient hunters, waiting for him to make a mistake. He clenched his jaw, his mind torn between staying hidden or risking the streets to search for what she needed. In the end, the choice wasn't really a choice. Daniel stood, his muscles stiff from sitting too long. He adjusted the blanket around her one more time, making sure her head rested on his jacket. She didn't stir, her face pale, lips slightly parted. He stepped toward the door and paused, listening. The clicking outside stopped for a moment. The silence even worse than the sound. He slipped into the hallway, moving quietly down the stairs. The shadows stretching along the cracked walls, each step creaked under his boots. The air thick with dust. Outside, the street was bathed in a pale, cold glow from the broken moon overhead. Daniel scanned the ruins, keeping to the shadows. He remembered passing a collapsed market earlier in the day, if there was anywhere left in this part of the city with supplies. It might be there, but it was several blocks away, and he'd have to cross open ground. He kept low. Weaving between broken walls and overturned vehicles, the wind howling faintly through the ruins. Halfway there, he froze. In the distance, tall shadow moved between the remains of two buildings. The clicking sound echoed again, followed by another from his left. His stomach tightened. There was more than one. He adjusted his grip on the knife at his belt, his other hand resting on the handle of his old pistol. The weapon scratched and worn, but still reliable. The market was just ahead. The roof mostly gone, the shelves inside tipped over and scattered. He slipped inside, his boots crunching over. Glass. The place smelled of old metal and rotting wood. He moved quickly, searching under debris and inside dusty crates. After a few minutes, he found a half-crushed bottle of water wedged between two broken shelves. The seal still intact. He grabbed it, then found a small tin of dried food buried under rubble. A faint noise made him stop, claws scraping against concrete, closer than before. His eyes darted to the entrance. The tall, thin silhouette of a predator stood there, its body angled low, its glassy black eyes reflecting the moonlight. Daniel's heart pounded as it stepped inside, its clicking filling the air. He moved slowly toward the side of the building. Keeping low, the creature sniffed the air, head tilting as it searched for him. Daniel stepped behind an overturned counter, holding his breath. The predator's clawed hand scraped against the wall as it crept further in. Without warning, another sound came from outside. A sharp, distant metallic clang. The predator's head snapped toward it. Its body tense. After a moment, it turned and slipped out into the night. Daniel exhaled quietly, his muscles aching from the tension. He didn't waste time, slipping back into the streets with the bottle and tin. Moving quickly toward the tower, the clicking sounds returned, following from a distance. Every time he looked over his shoulder, the streets were empty, but the feeling of being watched never left. When he reached the tower, he climbed the stairs two at a time. Stepping into the small room where she lay, her eyes were closed, her skin almost white now. Daniel knelt beside her, opening the bottle and tilting it to her lips. She swallowed weakly, a faint glow returning to her skin for just a moment before fading again. Her eyes opened halfway, focusing on him, her voice barely a whisper. "You came back." He nodded. Saying nothing, she drank again, her trembling slowing slightly. He opened the tin and offered her a small piece of dried food. She took it, with shaky fingers, chewing slowly. Daniel sat beside her, his back against the wall again, the bottle still in his hand. Outside, the clicking echoed faintly through the night. Closer than before, the predators hadn't given up. They were circling, waiting for their chance. Daniel tightened his grip on his pistol, his mind already planning for what might come when the sun rose. The girl leaned her head against his shoulder, her breathing still weak but steadier than before. Her voice so soft he almost didn't hear it. "They won't stop. Not until I'm dead." Her words sent a cold shiver down his spine. He didn't ask why, not yet, but he knew one thing. If they wanted her, they would have to go through him first. The first light of morning seeped through the cracks. In the tower walls, painting thin lines of pale gold across the dusty floor. Daniel hadn't slept, his eyes heavy, but his body tense. All night he had listened to the distant clicking, the slow movements outside. The predators had stayed close, but never attacked. They were waiting for something, and he had a feeling he knew what. The alien girl stirred beside him, her head lifting slightly, her eyes opening just enough to meet his. Her glow was faint, but her breathing steadier than the night before. She whispered something in her language before switching to broken English. They will come today, the way she said. It made his stomach knot. He asked quietly, the creatures. She shook her head slowly. Worse. Soldiers. Daniel didn't like the sound of that. Soldiers meant trained killers, and if they were hunting her, they wouldn't care who got in their way. He checked his pistol, sliding the magazine out. To count the remaining rounds, not many. His knife was sharp, but wouldn't be much help against rifles. Still, he wasn't about to hand her over. A sound from outside broke the morning stillness. Heavy footsteps. Not the quick skittering of predators, but the deliberate march of armored boots. Daniel moved to the broken window, peering down.
Oh.
3 figures were making their way through the rubble-strewn street, their armor dark and plated, helmets reflecting the sunlight. Long rifles slung across their backs. They moved with precision, scanning the buildings as they advanced. The girl's voice came from behind him, urgent but weak. If they find me, they will not let me live. Daniel turned to her. Then they won't find you. But even as he said it, he knew hiding might not be enough. The soldiers were getting closer, their boots crunching over broken glass and metal. He could hear the faint buzz of their comes as they spoke in short, clipped tones. Daniel quickly moved to the door. Pulling it closed as quietly as he could, he gestured for her to stay low. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. Her wide eyes following him, the sound of the soldiers' voices grew louder. And then, without warning, the sharp, metallic click of a weapon being loaded echoed from below. One of them had entered the tower. Daniel's pulse quickened. He knew. The other 2 would likely stay outside, covering the exits. The sound of boots on the stairs grew louder. Slow, deliberate steps. Daniel crouched near the door. Gripping his pistol, the girl watched him, her breathing faster now. The first shadow appeared under the crack in the doorway. The soldier stopped just outside, scanning the hallway. Daniel held his breath. The handle moved, the door creaking. Open. The soldier stepped in, rifle raised. Daniel didn't give him a chance. He fired once. The shot deafening in the small room, the soldier dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the floor. The girl flinched at the sound, her hand pressed over her mouth. Daniel moved quickly, grabbing the fallen rifle and checking the hallway. The other 2 soldiers were already coming up the stairs, their boots pounding against the steps. He turned to her. We have to move, now. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Daniel caught her, pulling her up into his arms again. They slipped out into the hallway, Daniel keeping the rifle ready. The shouts of the soldiers echoing behind them. He took the back stairwell. Moving as fast as he could without losing his footing, the air was filled with the metallic ring of boots and the sharp crack of gunfire as shots tore into the walls around them. They burst out into the street, Daniel ducking behind the remains of a rusted vehicle. Bullets striking the metal with sharp pings, he returned fire, forcing the soldiers to take cover. The girl clung to him, her eyes scanning the rooftops as if expecting more attackers. The moment the gunfire paused, he sprinted toward the narrow alleys between the ruins. The soldiers followed, their footsteps heavy, the shouts in their language cutting through the air. Daniel took sharp turns, weaving through debris, trying to lose them. But they were faster than he expected. Each time he looked back, the dark shapes of their armor were still there, closing the distance. They reached a collapsed section of road, a jagged drop into the remains of an underground passage. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped, landing hard on his feet, pain shooting up his legs. He stumbled, but didn't fall. The girl gasped, but held on. He ducked into the darkness, the air damp and cold. The sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. The soldiers reached the edge above them, their voices harsh and angry. Daniel kept moving through the narrow underground path, the only light. Coming from broken cracks above, he knew they wouldn't give up easily, but at least down here, the cover was better, and their numbers wouldn't matter as much. The girl's voice broke the silence, trembling but certain. They will keep coming until I am dead. Or you are. Daniel's grip tightened on the rifle, his eyes locked on the path ahead. Then we'll make sure it's them instead. The underground passage was narrow and uneven. The ground wet under Daniel's boots, the air damp and heavy with the smell of rust and old water. The faint drip echoed in the darkness. The alien girl's breathing shallow against his shoulder as he carried her deeper. Above them, faint voices and the sound of boots on the surface told him the soldiers were still tracking them. But down here, the walls distorted the sound, making it hard to tell how far away they were. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, its weight comforting in his hands, his eyes scanning ahead for any movement. The dim light from the cracks above was fading, replaced by a thick darkness that pressed in from all sides. The girl stirred slightly, whispering something in her own language before managing a few words in broken English. Not safe. Here, Daniel kept moving. Nowhere safe. He muttered under his breath. The tunnel split ahead. One path dipping lower, the other curving upward. Daniel stopped for a moment, listening. Faint clicking echoed from the lower path. The sound sharp and familiar. His jaw tightened. The predators were here too. Somehow they had found a way inside. He turned toward the upper path, moving quickly, his steps careful on the slick stone. The sound of soldiers above shifted, more muffled now, as if they had found an entrance somewhere nearby. The girl's grip on his jacket tightened, her head lifting slightly as if she could sense something he couldn't. Daniel's pace quickened. But then the upper path narrowed, the ceiling lowering until he had to duck. Water dripping onto his shoulders. A faint glow appeared ahead, just enough to outline the jagged walls. Daniel approached slowly, keeping the rifle raised. The glow came from a crack in the wall where the ceiling had partially collapsed, thin beams of daylight filtering through. He stepped closer, hoping it might lead outside. But the girl's sudden gasp made him freeze. A shadow moved across the light, long and thin, followed by the soft, wet sound of claws on stone. Daniel backed away slowly. The predator's head appeared through the crack, its glassy black eyes locking onto him, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. It let out a low hiss that echoed in the tunnel. Daniel fired without hesitation, the shot deafening in the narrow space. The creature recoiled, screeching, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it forced itself through the crack, its limbs bending unnaturally as it squeezed inside. Daniel turned and ran, the girl's weak arms clinging to him. The sound of claws scraping the floor close behind. The tunnel twisted sharply, leading into a wider chamber where old pipes lined the walls. The light here dim, but enough to reveal movement on the far side. 3 soldiers stepping into view, their rifles raised. Daniel skidded to a stop, caught between the predators behind and the soldiers ahead. One of the soldiers shouted something in their language. The girl tensed in his arms. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They were here for her. He shifted his stance, backing toward the wall as the predator's clicking grew louder. The soldiers' attention flicked toward the noise, their helmets tilting. The predator lunged from the shadows, its long claws slicing the air. One soldier fired, the shot hitting the creature's shoulder. But it didn't stop, it slammed into him. Dragging him to the ground, Daniel didn't wait. He fired at the second soldier. The impact throwing him back against the wall, the third soldier turned his weapon toward Daniel. But the predator was already moving again. Gunfire, hissing, and shouts filled the chamber. The girl buried her face against his chest. Daniel used the chaos to move along the wall toward another exit. He had spotted a narrow gap between two fallen beams. He slipped through, the sound of the fight fading. Behind them, the tunnel beyond sloping upward toward faint daylight. His legs burned with every step, his breath ragged, but he didn't stop. The light grew brighter until they emerged into the open air. The ruined city stretching before them, the morning sun hidden behind thick gray clouds. Daniel set the girl down against a low wall, scanning the streets for movement. She looked at him, her voice trembling but urgent. "You should leave me. They will keep coming." Daniel shook his head. "Not going to happen." Her eyes searched his face for a moment before she looked away. As if she couldn't understand why he was doing this, a distant gunshot echoed from the tunnels behind them, followed by the high-pitched screech of another predator. Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. It had only been delayed. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, lifted her into his arms again, and started moving toward the taller buildings in the distance. Somewhere up ahead, he needed to find a place they could disappear. Somewhere the soldiers and predators wouldn't follow, but deep down he knew such a place might not exist. The sound of soldiers above shifted, more muffled now, as if they had found an entrance somewhere nearby. The girl's grip on his jacket tightened, her head lifting slightly as if she could sense something he couldn't. Daniel's pace quickened. But then the upper path narrowed, the ceiling lowering until he had to duck. Water dripping onto his shoulders, a faint glow appeared ahead, just enough to outline the jagged walls. Daniel approached slowly, keeping the rifle raised. The glow came from a crack in the wall where the ceiling had partially collapsed, thin beams of daylight filtering through. He stepped closer, hoping it might lead outside. But the girl's sudden gasp made him freeze. A shadow moved across the light, long and thin, followed by the soft, wet sound of claws on stone. Daniel backed away slowly. The predator's head appeared through the crack, its glassy black eyes locking onto him, its mouth opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. It let out a low hiss that echoed in the tunnel. Daniel fired without hesitation, the shot deafening in the narrow space. The creature recoiled, screeching, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it forced itself through the crack, its limbs bending unnaturally as it squeezed inside. Daniel turned and ran, the girl's weak arms clinging to him. The sound of claws scraping the floor close behind. The tunnel twisted sharply, leading into a wider chamber where old pipes lined the walls. The light here dim, but enough to reveal movement on the far side. 3 soldiers stepping into view, their rifles raised. Daniel skidded to a stop, caught between the predators behind and the soldiers ahead. One of the soldiers shouted something in their language. The girl tensed. In his arms, Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. They were here for her. He shifted his stance, backing toward the wall as the predator's clicking grew louder. The soldiers' attention flicked toward the noise, their helmets tilting. The predator lunged from the shadows, its long claws slicing the air. One soldier fired, the shot hitting the creature's shoulder. But it didn't stop, it slammed into him. Dragging him to the ground, Daniel didn't wait. He fired at the second soldier. The impact throwing him back against the wall, the third soldier turned his weapon toward Daniel. But the predator was already moving again. Gunfire, hissing, and shouts filled the chamber. The girl buried her face against his chest. Daniel used the chaos to move along the wall toward another exit. He had spotted a narrow gap between two fallen beams. He slipped through, the sound of the fight fading. Behind them, the tunnel beyond sloping upward toward faint daylight. His legs burned with every step, his breath ragged, but he didn't stop. The light grew brighter until they emerged into the open air. The ruined city stretching before them, the morning sun hidden behind thick gray clouds. Daniel set the girl down against a low wall, scanning the streets for movement. She looked at him, her voice trembling but urgent. "You should leave me. They will keep coming." Daniel shook his head. "Not going to happen." Her eyes searched his face for a moment before she looked away. As if she couldn't understand why he was doing this, a distant gunshot echoed from the tunnels behind them, followed by the high-pitched screech of another predator. Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. It had only been delayed. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, lifted her into his arms again, and started moving toward the taller buildings in the distance. Somewhere up ahead, he needed to find a place they could disappear. Somewhere the soldiers and predators wouldn't follow, but deep down he knew such a place might not exist.